out of money! Do you know what this means, man? You're not getting your delivery of potatoes? No money means no animation.
Hey you, do me a favour and imagine an episode of an animated show. It could be any episode you want, maybe a personal favourite from your childhood, or one you stumbled upon on Netflix or Amazon Prime or HBO, but just picture it. And I want you to have a think about everything that goes into what you see and hear on screen. Moving characters, dialogue, Foley, which is the word for noises like footsteps, background art, any visual effects like bubbles or explosions or anything like that. Now, I want you to think of a number in your head that you think all of that is worth. Tally up how many people you think will be working on all of it, how much they would be getting paid, how long they would work, and I want you to hold on to whatever number you decide on. Because in a few minutes, I want you all to comment your number and let me know if it came anywhere close to the number I'm about to arrive at. The cost of animation can very quickly become an extremely heated debate because, simply put, there are a million ways to get hold of money, but there are just as many ways for that money to basically evaporate if you have the ambition of making anything, no matter the quality. With the rise of independent animation studios and creators who are increasingly relying on fan support rather than beg for their ideas to be considered by a large conglomerate, the topic of exactly how these individuals plan to fund their projects has remained one of the most contentious factors of the entire process. How on earth do you organize a crowdfund campaign? How do you know how much to ask for? How do you know how to divvy that up between production, sound, and other such expenses? This uncertainty has also fueled speculation among many animation fan communities online who may not necessarily trust that every project has their best interest at heart. And while it's true that there have been incidents in the past where people have effectively scammed their communities with the promise of a show-stopping creative endeavor, only to run off with the cash and never be seen again, it's extremely important to bear in mind that animation is both expensive and takes a ridiculously long time to make depending on how high quality the end product is intended to be. This is often why online visibility and communication between creators and fans has become so vital, and why making your project online during its production can be important for it to retain people's intrigue without forgetting about it by the time things are finally ready. Some lucky fellows may be able to follow through with the pursuit of personal creative freedom, but at what cost? Well, I'm hoping to take at least a crack at answering that question. Hello everyone, my name is fionapollo and I'm an artist and animator. I've been observing some of the online debates surrounding this, and even though I am sympathetic to the plight of animators who just want to create, as well as to fans who see a particular project doing insanely well but being frustrated at how slowly things might be going, it did make me realise that I also don't have the full picture of what the costs involve on any given production. I never got to work professionally, so I can't claim to know about this stuff on an intimate level, but I thought that by doing a bit of my own research today, it would be a really helpful and educational way of helping both myself and others understand a bigger picture. Like I mentioned, there are a million ways to make money, and I'll be taking a look at quite a few things such as the traditional production pipeline, crowdfunding, licensing and distribution, merch, and a few other aspects to this topic. I don't think I'll be able to cover or include absolutely everything because money can be a very huge and almost never-ending discussion, but if there is anything I don't mention that you think is worth bearing in mind, please don't hesitate to let me know in the comments, alongside that number you're keeping in your head. As well as that, if you enjoy what I discussed today, then please don't forget to like and subscribe. I talk about all things animation, as well as general art topics and pop culture, so there's bound to be something for you to enjoy. So with that said, why don't we start off with a little breakdown?
Filthy rich!
So I'm going to use one of my favourite childhood shows as an example when it comes to breaking down the cost of an animated series in the traditional format within an established studio. You guys remember Ed, Edd n Eddy? People always seem shocked when I mention it as my favourite show, but it is. It's actually the show that convinced me I wanted to become an animator.
Miss me!
But anyway, Ed, Edd n Eddy was a show that ran on Cartoon Network between 1999 and 2009, created by Danny Antonucci.
Hey folks, just adding in a last minute correction because for some reason I completely goofed on the fact that Ed, Edd n Eddy was actually animated by a Vancouver-based studio called AKA Cartoons, which Danny Antonucci founded in 1994, who is obviously also the creator of the show. I think that was why I got a bit muddled, so if you hear me referring to the show as being animated in-house, in this instance that means AKA Cartoons, not Cartoon Network.
The show's formula consisted of 2 separate 11-minute episodes being broadcast on TV back-to-back within a 20 to 30-minute segment that included ad breaks. We also need to just bear in mind that this show was made back when animation was experiencing a lot more economic stability than today, so many of the people working on this show were salaried in-house animators as opposed to being gig-based freelancers, which nowadays is a lot more common. So the first thing we're going to do is look at the credits at the end of any given episode. Now, this is a very rough count, which only includes actual people's names and not any listed production company names mentioned, as we have no way of knowing how many people that also involves. And bear in mind, some people did multiple jobs and had their names shown a few times, which I tried to catch. But if we look at just the rough numbers of people who worked on a single 11-minute episode in-house, in the credits, I counted roughly around 91 names. 91 people at Cartoon Network worked on a single episode of Ed, Edd n Eddy in the 2000s. That's actually quite insane, isn't it? Sadly, due to issues such as job creep recently, where smaller teams of people are expected to do multiple jobs, as well as tighter production deadlines, large teams like this appear to be more common when it comes to film nowadays. Unfortunately as well, many of the references I could find for the average salary at Cartoon Network, or rather the industry at large during this time, are from places like Reddit, which I don't trust because anyone could have written that. But what we do know, however, is that according to an article by Variety written in 1997, the animation industry experienced what was called a toon salary boom in the 90s, which carried over into the millennium. According to this article, lead key assistants were once happy earning $1,100 to $1,200 each payday. Hewlett wrote in an article in the June issue of Animation World magazine, now they feel cheated if they're only making $2,500. That said, in the same article, we are also informed that writer salaries in this time went down slightly. The median average for staff writers, for instance, fell from $2,300 a week in 1996 to $1,988 this year. For the sake of brevity, I'm going to use $2,100 as our median pay for these animators in this case, as I did include the writers in my credit counting. So now we also need to know how long it took to produce each episode so that we can determine how many of those 2,100 paydays this one episode accounted for per person. One interesting thing about this show in particular is that it was one of the last shows at Cartoon Network to be made using traditional cell animation. Afterwards, the studio moved towards a more digital pipeline. As such, there isn't much info on how long each episode took, but what we can do is use a guesstimation by looking at other shows that followed a similar production method. Thankfully, there are a fair few Cartoon Network shows that had a similar pipeline. Not many people realize this because a majority of its other production aspects were done digitally, but Steven Universe also happened to hand draw its character animations on paper. Both shows also follow the 11-minute episode formula and were produced at the same studio. And thanks to an interview conducted with Dee Dee Magno-Hall, the voice of Pearl, she remarked that one episode took an average of around 9 months to make.
And it takes, from start to finish, I think it takes anywhere between 8 to 9 months for one episode to be created.
Obviously, not every aspect of production is going to take the same amount of time. Ideally, things like scripting, storyboarding, and voice recording should be finished by the time the key animators and the like get hold of it. So to simplify things, we're going to treat it like the 3 stages of production, all took roughly 3 months each. So after all of that preamble, we can make a very rough guess that for each person being paid to work on a single 11-minute episode of Ed, Edd n Eddy for 3 months on $2,100 a month would earn an average of about $6,300 per episode. And if we times that $6,300 by 91, that brings us to about $573,300. That's just over $500,000 to produce just 11 minutes of cartoon hijinks. And you know the worst part? I'm still way off the mark, because team leads and managers such as art directors and obviously the creators themselves would be earning more than our median figure we arrived at. And this figure is also not including any unnamed overseas studios containing an unknown number of additional animators, legal consultants, and other such aspects that were also noted in the episode credits. But more or less, this is what you'd be looking at just for the base pay of the in-house production crew for a single episode. If anyone arrived at a similar number as this, now's your time to pipe up in those comments. And this was for a show where certain production elements aren't ginormous, even though it still retains a high level of skill and attention to detail. If this was for something like an action series with a lot of special effects and dynamic movement, which would probably also in turn require more planning during the pre-production stage, that cost can easily reach $1 million or more. If I was to look at a show like Invincible, for example, a superhero sci-fi series that involves more realistic proportions, and also things like special effects, which Ed, Edd n Eddy had far less of, with it being a slice of life show, these elements would probably also factor into the cost as well. Invincible might be a bit of a wildcard example, what with it costing a reported $2.5 million per episode, and also having been critiqued recently for its animation quality, not quite seeming to add up when considering its cost. I do just want people to bear in mind that production costs will also vary depending on where the show is created, but I have seen people question why they are valued so much higher than, say, a popular anime like Jujutsu Kaisen, which reportedly cost around $120k per episode. Obviously, I don't know enough about the current work culture in the whole of Japan, but considering I did a video on Jujutsu Kaisen's insane working conditions about 2-ish years ago, it doesn't particularly surprise me that its cost per episode is also quite low, and that's all I'm going to say on that. Of course, we also want to bear in mind the impact of inflation, but to be honest, I'm not actually 100% on how much wages have changed in the last 20 to 30 years in the industry if animators in the 90s experienced a salary boom. This is also something that isn't openly discussed that I could find much reference for, but I can only assume that since the general minimum wage in America also hasn't changed much within that time, those salaries may well largely be the same today. So if that's the case, why is it that some shows end up having such varied levels in quality compared to their cost? Well, oftentimes, animation budgets for a given episode or even an animated film can end up being massively overflated for various reasons. But the most notorious reason behind this is when it comes to voice acting. In the case of something like an animated film, which would you be more likely to watch? An animated film about singing animals, or an animated film about singing animals featuring Sabrina Carpenter in the voice cast? Companies are well aware that regular people are typically more likely to watch something if there is a recognizable household celebrity name attached to it. But unfortunately, getting Sabrina Carpenter to voice an anthropomorphic animal is not going to be cheap, hence the inflated budget, in which a sizable chunk goes to Sabrina, and whatever is left goes to the actual production. It's an amazing strategy to get more butts in seats and works very well for the celebrities, but not so much for the regular people working on them, since they don't exactly get paid any extra, but are now aware that a higher budget is available. They're just not entitled to it, apparently.
What are you doing here?
Collecting taxes.
So at this point, you may be asking yourself, how in the hell do studios get a hold of that kind of money? And yeah, I'm kind of with you on that. $500,000 could literally buy me a decent-sized 3-bed house where I live, and yet some bigwig executive for a cartoon studio is dropping more than that on a single episode. Hell, they're dropping it for a celebrity cameo. I love cartoons, but I like affording to live a bit more, so it's hard not to feel a certain type of way when looking at those kinds of figures, even when you know it's going towards helping other people put bread on the table, you know? And to be honest, tracing the funds is probably an even more difficult thing to answer if we want to factor in the indie side of things as well. So for the moment, I wanted to continue focusing on how these shows are funded in the mainstream so that we can draw a better comparison. And probably one of the biggest factors that separates mainstream corporate animation from the indie scene is the existence of large-scale shareholders and investors. A shareholder is an individual, a company, or an organization that legally owns at least one share of a company's stock, making them a partial owner. They hold a financial stake in the company or studio, which entitles them to dividends, voting rights on corporate policy, and a share of the assets if the company liquidates, while benefiting from limited liability. Basically, a shareholder kind of acts like a wealthy patron who offers a cut of their own wealth in exchange for a certain degree of power over a company or studio's practices. In a way, I guess the indie equivalent to this would be Patreon, but on a much grander scale. And these shareholders therefore have the ability to tell the studios exactly what they want and how they want it done. This can, in some cases, be an amicable arrangement, which works in the way that many regular people might envision, and some mainstream studios are in fact able to exercise a large degree of creative freedom despite not always being profitable. One such example of this currently is Studio Laika. Unfortunately, year on year since its first film Coraline, the box office profits generated by Laika Films has steadily declined, with its last film Missing Link in 2019 making only around $26 million in ticket sales despite having a $100 million budget. And it's quite an upsetting conundrum, because Laika's films are very obviously made with a lot of love and respect for its medium. It's one of the only well-known studios responsible for bringing stop motion to the forefront of mainstream entertainment, the other being Aardman Animations here in the UK. But that just doesn't always translate across to people watching from the outside who are not already invested in stop motion as an art form. So how is Laika still able to operate despite the fact that its profit margins compared to its production costs appear to have chasmed? This is probably a little bit of a contentious example due to it involving family members, but Laika's number one investor happens to be Phil Knight, co-founder of the company Nike. Why is this important? Well, it's because the CEO of Laika is his son, Travis Knight. Now, I don't like nepotism at the best of times, but for the purpose of getting my point across, we will acknowledge this fact now and move swiftly along. But my point here is that regardless of whether or not what you're working on is going to make money, you're still going to need some form of money coming in to do it in the first place. And this is true irrespective of your business model, whether you're making films, running a restaurant, or renting out power tools, I don't know. The reason mainstream studios manage this so well is because many are historic businesses that have already been around for ages and have managed to establish a rapport among prominent shareholders who have come come to expect a certain type of output from these studios. Obviously, some will have their own motives, such as Phil Knight just wanting to help his son with his own business endeavours, but also many other shareholders with less personable ties tend to understand that the actual creative pursuit is only one detail within the bigger picture. One thing that people seem to be divided on in online discussions when it comes to artistic pursuits versus profits in a modern capitalistic society is that the arts are just not a guaranteed return investment, and most people in higher positions of financial authority are in fact fully aware of this. There is every chance that you will be operating at a loss when you decide to pump money into a creative project, and even if a show is popular, this doesn't always translate to the kind of specific investment return a shareholder might be looking for. Even when television cartoons were at their peak, just the shows themselves made very little money on their own and would often not recoup the cost of what it took to make them outside of what a broadcasting channel would be willing to pay to have them. After all, TV isn't like film. You didn't have to purchase a ticket that would contribute to its box office numbers every time you tuned in on a Saturday morning. Instead, at least this is the way I'm seeing it, pinch of salt and all of that, TV and especially cartoons functioned as more of a vehicle to push advertisements and merchandising onto its viewers. Take for example Disney and Pixar's Cars franchise. The films themselves aren't amazing works of art, like they perform well obviously, but that's kind of a given with Disney films, but that's not strictly what they're designed for. They were designed for little boys and girls, but mainly boys, who loved playing with toy cars. And that fact alone has allowed the Cars franchise to generate around just under $20 billion in merchandising revenue for these companies since the original Cars film released in 2006. Another factor to a show making back its budget is broadcasting, distribution, and residuals. Back in ye days of old, in order to broadcast a show on a specific TV network, that network would pay a sum of money to whoever owns the show in order to fill certain time slots on their rosters. And if they wanted to be the only ones able to broadcast a show, they would often shell out even more money for exclusive distribution rights as well, which would be written into their contract. To alleviate some of this legal red tape, many shows and films would be created with a pre-drawn-up contract to be shown on specific networks, such as a large chunk of Cartoon Network's catalogue, as Cartoon Network the studio already had its own channel to broadcast its shows to. The same was true for a variety of channels like Disney Channel, Discovery Channel, a variety of sports channels, and so on. The idea that your show would almost be guaranteed to be broadcast on TV if you secured a contract with a specific studio was a huge motivator for animators back in the day who wanted to see their project make it to the household screen. It was a form of security tied to your creative product that just doesn't feel as prevalent anymore, even though more people than ever are watching movies or shows on their devices. Nowadays, paying for a distribution contract is still a common practice in the world of streaming, but from what I understand, streaming networks like Netflix tend to deal far more in lump sums than television does, and one of the knock-on effects of this is the eradication of royalties and residuals. As explained by Backstage.com for actors, residuals are payments an actor gets in addition to the original compensation, the upfront pay received in full for their performance. The idea is that because your likeness and work are generating new profits, you'll get a share of them. This, however, works a wee bit different for animation. Basically, if an animated series is rerun on TV or reused for an ad or whatever the reason might be, people such as voice actors, writers, and directors should receive residuals from this. But the way that streaming platforms get out of this is that royalties are calculated via the number of downloads or views a show gets. Except these numbers are entirely internal, so only these streaming platforms have access to them, making it near impossible for individuals to contest their lack of residual payments because they simply don't have access to the data that would back their case. It's honestly such a sneaky practice, and it's frustrating knowing that some shows are bought to be hosted exclusively on certain platforms because these streaming giants are aware that people still watch them, but are too greedy to let on about how many exactly. I genuinely don't get it. No, that's a lie. I do get it. It's greed. It's pure capitalistic greed, but I'm still allowed to be mad about it.
I'm all out of money!
So where does this leave animators and viewers when it comes to indie animation? Well, for one thing, indie basically means you don't have access to the traditional pipeline of creating a show under a specific studio and being handed a budget in which to do so, which of course means that you need to find a way to fund your project completely from scratch. Now, there are thankfully a fair few ways to do this, and one of the most common is crowdfunding. Thanks to the steep rise in indie projects opting to self-fund as of late, hopefully a good portion of you will be familiar with websites like Kickstarter. Kickstarter is a fundraiser website that allows people to set fundraising goals for a variety of pursuits, including the likes of making a video game, creating physical merch, or in this case, an animated series. Kickstarter not only allows fans to help fund a project they care about, but it also allows the organisers to arrange special rewards for people depending on how much they donate. But the question here still lingers. How do you know how much money to ask for? And while it's been established that this can vary widely depending on a whole bunch of factors such as how big your crew is or what kind of show you're going for, there are a number of Kickstarter campaigns run by people with professional experience in the field or who have managed to suss out and then communicate to their audience what it is they need and for what purpose. For example, the Kickstarter for the Moon Odyssey, an ongoing campaign with just 3 days left on its campaign as of this video's upload date, outlines on their page what percentage of their costs will go where. Please consider helping them out if you can, by the way, the deadline is insanely close. Kickstarter does unfortunately take 10% of any successfully funded campaign's earnings, which goes towards the site's upkeep to continue hosting these projects, but in the grand scheme of things, that is kind of a necessary loss. Some projects have even chosen to remain transparent throughout their production about how much money is required to keep them ticking over. The animated series Monkey Wrench has done this in the past by providing an episode cost breakdown on their Patreon. 54k is a drastically smaller budget than what we looked at in the beginning, but Monkey Wrench is both done by a smaller team and is being done as a passion project. Also, a lot of indie productions, due to having a smaller budget in comparison to mainstream, will instead offer indie rates of pay. This can be good, as it means people will still get paid for their work, but it is often a lot less than what you would get at a more established studio due to the lack of those oh-so-wealthy investors we talked about earlier.
Hey, just jumping in again while editing. There's actually been even more recent discussions about indie rates and the like since I wrote this script. TLDR of it all is that it is generally appreciated a lot more if you are upfront about whether a show is paying any amount of money, even if it's not all that much. Nothing kills the motivation for someone to join a project more than a lack of transparency on payment. If you're looking for volunteers, just say you're looking for volunteers, but if you are paying, be upfront and be transparent. But also try to acknowledge that that probably means people aren't going to prioritize your project among others that might be paying a bit more. And also try your best not to take that personally. Creative work is great, but for many it is still employment, it is still a job. Some people just want to do their work and get paid, and that's fine, okay?
You'll also notice that a good portion of concept work needs to be done prior to a Kickstarter campaign being organised, as these campaigns often function as a public pitch in order to get potential backers invested. The logistics of how you would manufacture certain physical rewards like posters or plushies would also need to be locked down as well before making any promises. It's also worth noting that even despite the help afforded by a Kickstarter campaign, many of the creative minds behind these projects will still be paying for various aspects of production out of pocket, or are even handling some of the key aspects themselves while receiving no pay at all. And in the unfortunate event that a campaign is unable to meet its goals, what happens then? Well, simply put, you would need to explore other avenues. Some Kickstarter projects are made by people who already have a small stream of revenue via a merch shop or something, so even though it may take longer to accrue the necessary costs, it is still achievable. Speaking of merch, this is probably the second largest revenue stream for any given indie production outside of crowdfunding, and actually serves to keep a production afloat after getting its feet off the ground. In the case of big indie studios like Spindlehorse or Glitch, merchandising is probably one of the most vital avenues to secure a consistent income that both funds their current shows and helps to keep people paid, hence why it tends to be pushed so much alongside their projects. Things like plushies and keychains are easy to conceptualize and design, they're cheap to manufacture, and there are a large number of platforms and distributors who can allow anyone from teams to individuals to set up an online shop that fans can easily access. One other way to receive a lump sum in order to produce a project, however, is by means of a potential scholarship or a grant. Now, these are a bit more selective in who is eligible to receive them, and it also means way fewer people may be able to cinch that cash, as only a handful of projects may be selected at a given time. But it's always worth checking out what kind of grants are available where you live. For example, a few years ago I lived in Wales for a short time, and in Wales there is an organisation dedicated to helping organise funding initiatives for Welsh filmmakers or those living in Wales who want to spotlight Welsh culture and language, known as Film Cymru. Many prominent animators such as Dana Terrace were also able to create short films early on in their careers thanks to these kinds of fundings. Dana in particular was able to obtain a grant from the National Board of Review in the US to work on her film Mirage prior to getting employed on Gravity Falls. Believe it or not, depending on the type of film you want to make, support is out there and people do want these creative endeavours to flourish, so it's worth taking a look at what is available in your country or state and see what the parameters may well be. But after all is said and done, there is one last tidbit of advice that I personally would like to impart on many of you. If you expect to see indie animation flourish at the same level as mainstream studios in a financial sense, then you are immediately setting yourselves up for failure. As much as it would be revolutionary for people to live and thrive by going indie, that simply is not a possibility yet, and yelling at professionals struggling to make ends meet while working on mainstream shows to go indie is not the solution you think it is. For one thing, this argument conveniently ignores that only a lucky few indie projects can manage to pay a living wage, let alone pay anyone, including those who come up with the project in the first place, and even smaller numbers of them offer any benefits like health insurance for their employees or their families. So Please just stop telling people to go indie. It's a very short-sighted suggestion with no real solution to the core issue of why so many animators are currently struggling. That said though, I do also believe we should absolutely move away from believing even a hugely popular or creative indie production is a failure if it doesn't manage to break even. Some of the most beloved and well-regarded animated works have overwhelmingly been commercial failures. Arcane, for example, is one of the most expensive animated series to ever be produced, costing a whopping $250 million for both seasons. And yet it was actually considered a flop due to it not making all that much profit or driving a lot of traffic towards the game it was based on. Even animation legends like Satoshi Kon remarked that his films didn't make much money, despite the fact that he is regarded as one of the most influential animators of a generation. Money has become kind of a sickness in all aspects of society, and if you are only looking at profitability in a capital sense, then I'm afraid you have vastly underestimated what the true cost is. And the true cost of animation, in my opinion, is art. And while art isn't designed to make you rich or feed your family, it is definitely designed to feed your soul. And that, folks, is all that I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope it was at least a tad useful. I know this is a very difficult thing to encapsulate in one video, but I tried my best, and have no fear, for I am currently working with some fellow indie people on a much larger video that will hopefully cover a bit more on this topic, as well as provide a lot more resources for those looking to fund their creative projects. That's going to come out later on this year. We still have a lot of planning to do. For now though, consider the videos I'm putting out now as a bit of an aid to my further research for that one. I'm really excited, and I'm hoping it'll be of help to at least someone. But that said, thank you again, especially to my fantastic Patreon supporters. You guys are my heroes. Thank you to my tip jar supporter, Pedantic Cat. Thank you to my YouTube peeps, Manuel Lexon Gonzalez, Mystic Mind, Lauren R, Ash Valentine, Lonim the Her, Craig, Edboy, Steph Goes Doodles, Why Not Warrior, and Ty Shan. And an extra special thank you to my indie production supporters, Morgan LaFay de Thin, Matty A, Kiyoshi, Roundcat, Arsonist, and Nomad Bob. If you're interested in joining the Patreon, a link can be found in the video description. Stay safe everyone, and I will speak to you hopefully very soon. Bye! Hello, little loaf. Do you have anything to add?